Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our next breakout session. I'm very happy to introduce Dan Trolaro. I had the opportunity to see Dan present at the national conference in Boston, and even though he is coming to us via Zoom, I am quite certain you're going to be able to feel his energy. So Dan Trolaro is presently Vice President of Prevention in the United States for Epic Risk Management.
We'll not be able to see you.
As the Assistant Executive Director for the Council on Compulsive Gambling of New Jersey. Upon graduating from the College of New Jersey with a major in finance and a concentration in economics, he spent 12 years in the world of investment banking, risk management, and financial planning. And despite the successful career, Dan had also been suffering in silence from a gambling addiction, coupled with the traumatic events of September 11th, 2001. Dan eventually left the world of finance so he could heal personally and be a help to others who suffer from or are at risk to develop gambling problems. And to that end, Dan has worked with stakeholders in over 25 states, has delivered hundreds of workshops, probably thousands, trainings, and keynote presentations around the country centered on prevention, education, and emerging trends in the world of gaming and gambling. And if you have heard of Dan Trolaro, it's possible that you've heard him as a co-host on the podcast Hello Craig with Craig Carton. Each week, Craig and Dan speak to a person in recovery with the show's hope that by sharing gambling recovery stories, more people will learn about this addiction and minimize the stigma associated with it. So please welcome Dan Trolaro.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's about an hour ahead. I appreciate that. About 11:20 on the clock here in New Jersey, where the temperature I think is about the same as it is out in Minnesota. The only difference is we don't quite have our snow yet. It's coming this evening. So I hope you're all having a good conference and having a great start to your day. Looking forward to also being back with you later on in the day to talk about finances and day trading and gambling behaviors and all that good connected stuff that needs to be addressed, especially if we're working with people in recovery from any type of addiction. You know, addiction switching is a real thing. So it's good that we can address these different topics. But for this morning, you know, I'm sorry I can't be out there in person, taking care of some personal things back here. And then over the weekend, my one daughter ended up with the flu. So definitely don't want to be passing that along to anybody as we enter Thanksgiving next week. But for today, we're going to spend a little time talking about a program that Epic Risk Management in partnership with the NCAA completed. And today actually marks the end of the first year as some of the staff are out in Indianapolis presenting to the NCAA on the findings and the successes of our first year collaboration with the NCAA, where we're talking about sports betting, integrity issues, threats to the student athlete, and really finding and uncovering some really amazing stuff. And we're going to talk a little bit about what is the risk? You know, why do we have to pay attention to the student athlete, to sports betting? What are we doing with colleges? And also, what are we starting to see in the world of sports betting? You know, we see commercials, we see marketing, we know gambling is expanding state by state. I've done workshops around the country and hundreds of workshops around the country on emerging trends, on marketing and advertising, on sports betting. And it's interesting how each state can decide how and if to regulate, legislate, enforce sports betting and gambling across the board, right? PASPA was repealed in 2018, paving the way for each state to decide what to do. And each state has taken a stance. They enforce it. They set aside funding for it. Hopefully more dollars are on the way in some states. We know California really has been in a contentious battle with the tribes and with the operators. So each state is left to decide how and whether or not if to enforce and regulate. But we still have to address this because it's coming. You know, sports betting is massively popular. The revenue numbers are huge. It's coming quickly. You know, I was just out in North Dakota last month, and that's something that's on the docket on your neighboring state for early January. And it's a concern. It's something that we need to address. So we're going to spend a little time. I'm going to take you through a little bit about what we cover with the student athletes, with the colleges, a little bit about what makes our program very successful. And I'll give you a little tip. It has to do with lived experience. You know, when we can meet people where they are and we can become vulnerable and share a little portion of ourselves in hopes that someone else can really maybe see themselves through that story and give them the courage to then say, hey, listen, I know someone who has a problem. What do I do? That's the goal. The goal is to have people really step back and take a look at, okay, what are the concerns? What are the harms? What do I have to be aware of? And if I do experience harm, what do I do and how do I get help? So let's go through the session today. And I'm going to start off with a video that we tested the sound. You'll be able to hear it. And this actually just was on the news in the New York area last month, or actually probably just a couple of weeks ago. It was on Good Morning America just a couple of weeks ago. And they talked about teenagers and gambling. And they kind of interviewed a young person, and they kept his anonymity, with respect to his age. But you can hear some of the challenges in this video. It's about a 5-minute video. So let's start there and let's move through the session, and we'll leave some time for some Q&A at the end. It's good to see you, and I hope you enjoy the session. Let's get started.
We're going to turn now to our GMA cover story in our series, Cracking the Kid Code. We're highlighting teens and gambling, a growing issue since 2018 when the Supreme Court struck down the federal ban on sports betting. Now about 31 states and Washington, D.C. have legalized it, and our Juju Chang has more. Good morning, Juju.
Good morning, Michael. You know, online gambling is the fastest form of gambling in the world, according to a recent report. Nearly 3,000 internet sites and growing. We've been following one teenager battling a gambling addiction. He spoke to us in shadow with his voice altered. He wound up thousands of dollars in debt, but it wasn't just the financial damage. He says underage gambling left his young life in shambles.
Online gambling is popping up everywhere, with kids and teens enticed by the risks and the rewards.
If you have a phone on you and you have connection to the internet, you can gamble whenever you want.
Steve is an 18-year-old speaking candidly to GMA about his gambling addiction, which began at age 15. He's asked to be in shadow, to use a different name and alter his voice to hide his identity.
All it took was playing dice. From there, it just kind of grew.
How much did you win?
It's a couple $100.
That was your first hit.
That was like the first high.
Steve says that from there, the desire to gamble intensified, his sports obsession morphing into an illegal sports betting obsession, making bets not just on wins and losses, but putting money on every inning or every basket.
It's not about just watching a sports game. It's more about watching for the money.
The legal age for gambling in the U.S. is 18 or 21, depending on the state and the type of game. But experts warn that early exposure can lead to gambling addiction.
Teenagers and young people are significantly at higher risk of developing gambling disorder than adults, in part because their brains are not fully developed. Their ability to evaluate risk, their ability to handle loss isn't as secure as an adult.
Steve says he was able to access legal sports betting sites by using other people's accounts who were of age to illegally gamble. He also used unregulated offshore illegal websites.
Our culture is seeing young adults raised in a society where gambling is the norm, and people don't think of it as risky anymore.
For Steve, gambling became a full-time job, placing bets during school and staying up all night.
I kind of use gambling as an escape.
And he says he began lying and stealing money to pay back debts.
It affected my relationship with my family, with some of my closest friends. There were days where I was kind of just sleepwalking.
His father, who we're calling Martin, also asked to have his voice altered to protect his identity. He says at first he and his wife failed to fully grasp how destructive his son's gambling addiction had become.
What did you miss along the way? What do other parents miss?
How quickly it became an obsession.
With his family's support, Steve has joined a 12-step program, gone to rehab, and is now in recovery.
What do parents need to know?
Advertisements, all the commercials, they really make it seem like it's like a good thing. I've never seen a commercial talking about the downsides of it.
How many parents out there do you think are aware that their teenage boys have a gambling problem?
Not as many as there are.
We reached out to the American Gaming Association, who told us the U.S. gaming industry invests hundreds of millions of dollars annually in consumer education, employee training, research, and support. Our collective responsible gaming commitment includes comprehensive protocols in place to verify the identity and age of customers. It's our priority that gaming remains entertainment strictly for adults. But Steve's dad says it's not enough.
It's in every sporting event. There's advertisements constantly. We don't sit and watch a game together like we might have done when he was younger. It has been hard to have removed that from our relationship. There's just not that level of education, and there's just not that level of awareness of it as a problem.
Now, since our interview, Steve is doing well with setbacks and regularly attends gambling 12-step meetings. His family says they're just grateful to have their son back in a normal way of life and living. Experts say the key is to talk to your kids about the risks of gambling and have open conversations. If you or a loved one is struggling with a problem gambling, call the National Problem Gambling Helpline at the number on the screen or go to ncpgambling.org. Confidential support is available 24/7. Guys?
And so that's interesting. Yeah, obviously the other national helpline is 800 Gambler. We have state resources, obviously in Minnesota. But you heard a couple of tidbits in that video. Age of onset, experiencing a big win at an early age, not seeing the downside. Those two factors right there lead someone to be at a higher risk, right? It's the good feeling. It's, wow, this is easy money. But fast money, as we know, spends fast. You talk to people who are convicted and spending time away for drug-related crimes, for drug dealing, or for using. It's a fast lifestyle. And gambling can fall into that for people as well. You get caught up in this feeling. And what makes gambling so difficult to abandon is that every so often you actually win something. For any of you that have gambled in the past, you know that every so often you win something and it feels good. The problem, though, is threefold. You don't know how much, how often, or when it will occur next. But those are the things that keep an individual coming back. And when you have young, impressionable adults where brain development, from a brain development perspective, the decision-making piece is the last piece that develops in a brain, mid to late 20s, assuming no other neurological delay or disruption, they don't understand appropriate risks at times because of the lack of education, because of the lack of information around the harmful potential effects of someone developing a gambling problem. So it leads to this almost perfect storm when you see all the positive, glamorous sides of marketing without the counterbalancing of advertisement. That's why more does need to be done. And that's so important. That's why we are working with the NCAA in sport, because Epic Risk Management specializes in a few different areas, sport being one of them. As a matter of fact, just yesterday, just late last night, on Twitter, there was an article about a former LA Dodger, Yasiel Puig, was just indicted for running a gambling scheme. This just came out last night. So now they're investigating him and some other Major League Baseball organizations. I just saw it on Twitter. It was circulating amongst us because we use content. Calvin Ridley from the Falcons had an issue last year as a wide receiver for gambling. So we see these issues popping up. So we're here because we have to find that right balance. The convergence of sport and gambling, it will bring more commercial partnerships. It will bring more relationships. You can't help but watch a sporting event now and not see the lines or the odds on a contest. And I want to be very clear. I'm not anti-gambling. I am a person in long-term recovery. I don't know when it got to be long-term, but it's 12 and a half years. It's February 11th, 2010, since I last felt the need to place a bet. And I bet on the illegal sites. I bet on the offshore sites. I'll share with you some of my story a little bit later on, but it's important that we talk about the warning signs, the potential for harm, because gambling should be a form of entertainment that can be enjoyed by a large percentage of Americans. However, for a subset of that population, they start to experience harmful side effects. And it could be anything. It could be relationship issues, productivity issues at work. It could be self-worth. It could be emotional issues, because we understand gambling disorder is not a money problem. It's an emotional problem. I was just messaging with a gentleman out of Morocco in North Africa, and he had seen a video I had done on a YouTube channel recently. And he said, listen, he goes, I relate to everything you said. He goes, but I don't have a gambling problem. I have a money problem because I can't pay my debts. And we had a really hard conversation because I had to make him understand the reason for his money problem did in fact have to do with the gambling. That was a part of the issue. And so getting back to that core issue of, yes, it's the gambling that caused the money problem, but he's gambling as a way to deal with his partner's suicide from 2 years ago. And when you start connecting those dots, you help people really start to understand a little bit more about what's going on. So that's important. We have a duty of care to educate and protect not just student athletes, but all people who might develop harm. But specific to this presentation, we start talking about college age individuals and student athletes, that 18 to 22 demographic, the emerging brain, the emerging adult. Because in America, in North America, we understand that 2 million Americans meet the criteria for severe gambling problems. 4 to 6 million more Americans suffer from some type of problematic habit with their gambling. Living in New Jersey, our state, according to Dr. Leah Nauer from the Rutgers Gambling Studies program, she did a prevalence study about 5 years ago, and it showed that New Jersey has 3 times the national average for disordered gambling rate. So if the national average is roughly 1.9%, New Jersey's around 5.5 to 5.7% based upon the studies. One of the areas she attributes that to is that New Jersey has had online and mobile device gambling legalized since 2013. So when you have a casino or a sports book in your pocket 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you don't get a break from it. And what's interesting is that when you think about the way the products are designed, they look interesting. They look fun. And there's something when people are drawn to something that's new and shiny, they want to check it out. They want to take it for a test drive, if you will. And so all of a sudden you'll download the app, you'll get a marketing promotion that says, hey, if you deposit $10 and Kirk Cousins, let's use a Minnesota reference here, Kirk Cousins throws for more than 1 yard in their next football game, you win $250. Well, you're sitting there on your couch saying, well, of course he's going to throw for more than 1 yard. He's got Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson, 2 of the great running back receivers in the NFL. So this is easy money. And so you win your $250 free risk, no risk bet. And now you have an account with $250 in it. And now you can start experimenting and testing out the product. And that's how simple it can start for people. And it feels good. And I'll show you a video in a little bit that it has nothing to do about winning, but it has everything to do about the brain activation and actually participating in the whole process of gambling. But in a college setting, the risk of developing a gambling addiction more than doubles for young adults in a college setting. And there's a couple of areas and a couple of reasons for this. Number one, we've been to college, or if you haven't, you know of someone who's been to college. It's a new experience. It's fun. It's your time to experiment. You're going to experiment with things that you wish you didn't, and you may experiment with things that you kind of just tuck with you and you take with you in your life. You know, for me, when I was in college, one of the things I experimented was waking up early and exercising early in the morning. And I carried that with me for years. It just worked for my lifestyle. I had never done it before, but when I went to college, it's the way it worked out. And I did that for a good 10 to 15 years. So there are certain habits, certain things that we start to pick up. It's all about testing and meeting new people and understanding how relationships work and dynamics. So with that, though, you're also away from home. You don't have as close parental influence, and you're around other people who bring other stuff with them from their backgrounds, and you're in that risk-taking mentality. So now all of a sudden you have more exposure, more awareness, and you're at a higher likelihood of developing a gambling problem. But specific to that, then, in a college setting, athletes are actually up to 4 times more likely to develop a problem with their gambling. And there's a few reasons for that, which we'll highlight. But typically, athletes will tend to bet on the sports that they know or that they play, even though they're not allowed to. NCAA is very clear that if you're a student athlete, you cannot bet on sports, right? And so we have to be very careful. We've spoken around the country to over 65 colleges and universities this past year. And just a couple of statistics. We've reached over 11,000 student athletes and staff from over 65 universities. We received almost 6,000 responses to surveys that we've sent out. And the satisfaction, the awareness, all the numbers line up. Everyone's just really pleased to see that this topic's being spoken about. But a couple of areas where they are just hungry to learn more centers around budgeting, financial literacy, the impact of gambling addiction on one's mental health, or how mental health can contribute to someone's gambling addiction. Also, the warning signs, the local resources, and the threats against the student athlete. That is one that has come up time and time again. When we talk about gambling expansion in the United States and athletes, we have to remember people are wagering on the performance of athletes at times. Sports betting has become not just the outcome of the game, but what will happen on the next sequence, what will happen on the next play, what will happen on the next pitch. During the World Series, one of the sportsbook operators was offering the ability for someone to bet pitch by pitch on the game. Could you imagine sitting watching the World Series? Houston Astros. I'm a Yankees fan, so I did not watch the World Series. Houston Astros against the Philadelphia Phillies, and you're placing a bet on every pitch. There are about, as a former pitcher, I played baseball at a high level, there's about 250 to 300 pitches a game. That's a lot of mini micro bets, micro transactions that you can place during the course of a game. And athletes are more likely to develop gambling related problems because there are certain personality traits that athletes have. Number one, athletes are competitive. You don't have to just be an athlete to be competitive, but athletes, especially when you're playing Division I sports or you're playing pro sport, athletes are competitive. So they're comfortable with that competitive nature. They thrive on it. Number two, they're risk takers. What makes an athlete more vulnerable to developing an addiction, especially to gambling, is the risk-taking mentality. If you're a successful athlete, you have to know when to take certain risks. If any of you have played sports in your life and have played sports at a high level, there are certain times during a match or during a sporting contest where momentum might start shifting. You have to take a risk to try to stop or break that momentum. But you know how to take an appropriate risk when you've played a sport your whole life. But if you're new to the world of gambling, you may not know what appropriate risks are versus inappropriate. So athletes are competitive, they're risk takers, and they're driven by a fear of failure. Fear of failure is what motivates a lot of athletes to get back up, to try again, to do it over, to keep going, to stay on that basketball court until they've hit those 5 straight free throws to end the night. Fear of failure. They don't want to fail. And when you have athletes that are dealing with injuries or potentially losing a spot on their team, they are driven and motivated. Those are some of the personality traits that are really positive, but can also lead to issues in other areas of their life if they don't have good balance, if they don't have good coping skills, good life skills, anger resolution, emotional awareness, right? We don't want to see gambling become an unhealthy coping mechanism, just like alcohol or drug use. Gambling can serve that same need. That's why we have to educate. We have to educate both in the space around gambling and then outside the space to make sure that individuals understand the risks, the appropriateness, the budgeting, the entire gamut. That's why it's not such a simple solution. We have to cover it from a life skill, from a holistic perspective. But let's take a look at this video from the British Broadcasting Corporation. I mentioned something before. We're concerned, and I started the video by showing the video clip from Good Morning America about teenagers because of the developing brain. But let's go a little bit more into the brain and take a look at this 4.5-minute video from the BBC where they put a gambler inside an MRI machine and they were tracking his brain activation to see what's going on as he's gambling at a roulette table. And what they find is quite interesting. Take a look.
It's getting me excited already.
We arranged for gambler Tony Franklin to join a unique experiment by one of the world's leading experts on addiction, Professor David Nutt.
Gambling addiction is not a failure of will. It is a brain disorder which is preyed upon by the gambling industry.
Honestly, I can feel my heartbeat just rising, just looking at the damn thing.
Once you become addicted, it's very, very hard to stop because you've changed your brain. Addiction is a brain that has changed to become entrained to the desires of the gambling.
So we're going to start the roulette task, Tony.
This will be the first time anyone plays something similar to a fixed odds betting terminal from inside an MRI scanner. The professor says it will reveal what's happening in Tony's brain as he uses a keypad to bet.
Got £1,000 to spend. Can I spend it all on the first spin?
When Tony is doing his task, when he's looking at the roulette wheel and he's making a decision to bet, parts of the brain get turned on and then they can't stop. And we think there's probably a chemical basis to that. So that's what we're expecting to see, that the habit centers are overactivated in people with gambling compared with normal people like us. The brain's not very active. Maybe a little bit here, he's thinking at the, what shall I do? But it's pretty calm. Contrast that with what happens in the next one. And
that's a huge difference from
indeed
there to there.
Exactly.
So that's in a matter of seconds as well, would it be?
Exactly.
Or?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
So here we see the visual system, the back of the brain here, intensely activated. He's watching really closely. He wants that ball bearing to come down on his color. And now we look at the emotional regions. And these are different regions activated. This is the anterior cingulate cortex. This is the insular. And these are the two areas of the brain which make sense of emotions. They may generate the emotion he's feeling of excitement. Will I win? Won't I win? And here we see a very similar picture. In fact, the only real difference between winning and anticipating is this area here. And this is an area where I think we see the sense of satisfaction. Yeah, I've won. That's good. Register that. Start again. But overall, winning and waiting to see if you've won, the anticipation, they're both pretty much the same. And that's a really key point about gambling. It's not just the winning that counts. It's the taking part. And the taking part repeatedly when you don't win is as activating to a gambler as the winning. When you're sitting at a fixed odd terminal, you're getting this every 20 seconds.
Yeah.
So you can have hundreds of them. And so that process can become, in the end, it becomes kind of habitual. It becomes addictive.
That is a critical piece. It's not just the winning that counts. It's the taking part. So it's the participation, the anticipation, then the actual action. And what's fascinating about the world of sports betting, as well as the world of investing, and I'm putting a plug in for this afternoon's session, Chris Farrell, is that the research process that goes into picking a stock, a cryptocurrency, or a team that you want to bet on is intensive, and it becomes all consuming for some people. That's the process. That's the participating. People will romance the process of gambling because you'll get all of your news articles, all of your content from the web, and you'll start dissecting and digesting lots of information, taking notes, highlighting things, pulling out the key pieces of information that you think will be the difference between winning and losing. And then you're going to put your hard-earned money behind what you perceive to be those key metrics in order to try to win something of value. The process can take hours for some people or days, and they romance the process. It's the participating, and that's just as activating as the gambling itself. It's a fascinating, fascinating video that I think is just so spot on. I remember living in New Jersey. I remember while I was in the midst of my gambling addiction, very, very rarely did I drive to an in-person casino. I did not like going to the brick and mortar casino. Number one, it was far from my home. It was a good 2.5 hour drive each way. So if I was needed back home for some reason, you're talking 2.5 hours. I can't just shoot home from work where I was supposed to be, which was 25 minutes away. But I also didn't want to be seen. Right? That was the other reason. I just liked the internet. It was fast. It was easy. It was accessible. I could do it from anywhere in my car or a Starbucks or whatever it was. But I remember when I would drive to those brick and mortar casinos, the anticipation as I could see them in the distance, and I was on that expressway getting to the casino, I could feel my heart racing. It was palpable. can really feel a difference. So it's that anticipation that really lights up some of the brain activation too. So the work we do with the NCAA, we talk about brain activation. We talk about the warning signs. We talk about what makes a student or a student athlete more vulnerable based upon age, risk taking. If they're student athletes, the competitive nature, the fear of failure. But we also share our vulnerabilities, our lived experience. And I'll share with you a bit today about some of my journey so that you understand my perspective on where I come from when I do present around the country. I'm not someone who's read it in a book. I've read a lot of books, a lot of research. I'm not a book reader. I'm more of a trade reader. I love reading about the world of gambling and addiction and psychology and all that. But it comes from firsthand experience and feelings and emotions that I went through. And you'll see some images here. And we also do want to create a safe place for people to learn. And so oftentimes before I share my journey, my lived experience, I do say, hey, listen, content warning. We're going to talk about things like suicide and September 11th. And so if you feel uncomfortable with those, or if that's something that's going to be triggering, we always encourage a student athlete or a staff member, they can feel free to leave. I mean, they don't have to sit and listen if there's going to be something triggering. And I extend that same grace over to you all there in Minnesota virtually. I never want to be triggering. We had an instance where we were at Penn State University, and there was a member of one of the athletics teams whose brother had been shot and killed in Baltimore, Maryland, just 2 weeks prior to me arriving there. He was shooting dice on the streets of Baltimore, and the game went south. Somebody grabbed a weapon and they shot and killed him. And the story about gambling was just too heavy for this individual to hear. She had lost her brother just 2 weeks previous. In the same token, at a university, when we were talking about, I started talking about September 11th, one of the assistant coaches for baseball team had to leave. He lost his uncle and his nephew. They were first responders in New York City, and he lost them on that day. He doesn't want to hear about September 11th. It's too hard for him. So I extend that same courtesy to you here as I go in and just share a little bit about my story. And this is what we share with the student athletes as well. I was born January 24th, 1976. So I'm 46 years old. I've been in recovery since February 11th of 2010, and I'll get to that point in a moment. But I did have an older brother. I still do. And I was the oops child, though. My parents always wanted one. They never had plans for two. And so I came along about 5.5 years after my brother. And, my mom was around when I was a baby. And my understanding is that she left when I was around 2 years old. She split. She had emotional issues she had to take care of. And so she left left me with my father and my brother. It was the three of us. And I grew up in a German-dominated household. My experience is that the German culture was not always warm and fuzzy. That's just my experience. And my dad never learned how to, extend compassion or love because his parents didn't show that to him when he was younger. And oftentimes we carry down generational messages. And if we don't take the time to really analyze, hey, is this good? Is this healthy? Does this work for me in my life? We're just going to continue to repeat the same process, repeat the same cycle. That's how just cycles are formed year after year, generation after generation. So I was kind of in the midst of that. Never really learned to talk about my feelings, never learned to talk about what was bothering me, never really learned to cry or show emotion. And I also grew up around gambling and alcohol my entire life. And the gambling was interesting because it was the one time that I would see my dad in a different light. During the week, he was working hard, never had time to talk. But my first love of gambling came at the racetrack. It was betting on horses. And I was 12 years old the first time I went to the racetrack with my dad. And I never saw the negative side, just like that teenager in the video never saw the negative side. I saw only the positives. And for me, it had nothing to do about winning money. That wasn't my positive. My big win at an early age was spending time with my father. And so I always mention that because I think we look for the big win to be a monetary amount. In the eyes of a child, a big win is connection. A big win can be connecting with a family member who is so busy and so not present that when you do actually reach them and connect with them, you're going to try to replicate that scenario or that environment so that it can happen again. And in my case, it happened at the racetrack. That was my big win at an early age. And so I learned early on that gambling was fun. Gambling is what bonded families together. Gambling is what brought me and my father together. And I loved it. And so I would do everything to try to impress him, to try to get him to pay attention. I loved handicapping the horses. There's that process, right? The romancing of the whole process of gambling. Getting the newspaper on a Thursday or Friday to see which horses were going to be running that Saturday, and starting to kind of dissect and digest the information. You know, which horse is running? What are the weather conditions? Who's the jockey? What trainer trains them? Where are they running out of? Which post position? I wanted to take it all in. And I loved that process. But I also started making my friends based on gambling. I always thought gambling was just super cool and was absolutely fantastic. So I made my friends based upon that. And all of a sudden, I'm friends with a school, the friend of mine in the school whose father was a bookie in town. So now I'm not making good choices, good decisions. I'm starting to run with the wrong crowd. I never did drugs, never drank excessively, because I love playing sports. And to me, gambling was a thing I could hide from other people and still be successful at sports. And as I share with the student athletes, oftentimes I was a baseball player. I didn't play I played basketball for 2 years in high school. I love playing basketball, but I'm 6'1". If I stood up right now, I'm 6'1". I was the center on my high school basketball team. So I have no height, not for center, but as a pitcher, I was a dominating pitcher. I was scouted by the Phillies and the Reds, Cincinnati Reds, Philadelphia Phillies, my junior year of high school, as well as 3 Division I colleges. Things were really looking good, but I had a massive ego problem. I didn't want anyone to tell me what to do. I had all the solutions. I was a typical 17-year-old, didn't want any help from anyone. And I remember that I was given some advice from the scout from the Cincinnati Reds saying, you're going to have an arm problem if you don't change up some of your mechanics. You're running the risk of developing a rotator cuff, a shoulder injury, if you don't make some changes. And I looked at him and said, I don't have to make changes. I'm good. I've never had an injury my entire life. And so over time, my shoulder kind of developed more arm problems until I partially tore my rotator cuff. He was right. I was wrong. It would be the first of many times in my life that I've been wrong and continue to always be wrong on a daily basis, I'm sure. But that really started leading to some bad decision making. Gambling was still a part of my life. I was still involved in gambling. I was done with sports. I couldn't play baseball at the level that I was accustomed to anymore. I went to college to play ball. I got kicked off the team because I just couldn't play. My arm wasn't good enough. I wasn't a good enough ball player to play. And I had never been told I was never good enough. And when the coach told me, you're not good enough, I got so angry. I slammed my glove down and I went back to my dorm room. And my best friend is with me at the time. And I said to him, and I remember it like it was yesterday, I said, they don't know how good I used to be. And he looked at me and said, they don't care how good you used to be. They only know that you suck now. And we almost got into a fight over that, but we didn't. But he was so right when I look backwards. And so I had to make a decision to change up my life. I had to start doing things a little differently. Gambling's still a part of it, but I ended up graduating college with a major in finance, a minor in economics. I worked at Goldman Sachs in New York City, one of the premier investment banks in the world at the time and to this day. And life was good. I ended up getting married in 2001 to the girl I was dating in college. That was June of 2001. And less than 3 months later, everything changed. I remember working in the city on September 11th. I remember getting into the city that morning. It was a beautiful day. It had been raining heavy the night before. And as I was in my office around 8:30, 8:45, I remember looking out the window from our office building and I saw a plane flying really low. And that plane crashed into the towers. And I remember at the time thinking, what a terrible accident that is. How can a plane hit a building? You know, how could you not see this building there? And I just was so confused, like so many people were. And what we came to realize later was that it was no accident. And I remember that next hour, hour and a half was quite a blur, a lot of mayhem, a lot of confusion. The phone lines were down in our building. We were about 0.2 of a mile to the east of the World Trade Center. And my managing director came running into my office around 9:30 saying, we have to go. We've got to go now. And we went down to street level And we weren't looking to leave the city. We had to run towards the towers because his wife was on the 78th floor and we were trying to find her. As we're running towards the towers, we're making our way through, and really wasn't even running. You're trying to navigate just thousands of people all over the city. I remember looking up and seeing off to my left, I see a body hit the pavement. I see another body hit the pavement. People started jumping out of windows because they were just trying to just be safe from 50 stories, 60 stories up. We got to as close as we could, which wasn't very close. And over time, we realized that this was not going to be good. The towers fell that day. His wife, she died that day in the towers. I ended up losing 14 friends and 2 more to suicide in the weeks that followed because they felt that they did not deserve to live. Dealing with a lot of loss like that kind of really messed with me emotionally and mentally. And I went back to that thing that made me feel better, and that was gambling. For me, gambling, I associated that with a peaceful, pleasant time in my life. It was a way that I could escape problems. It was a way that I had to continue to portray this solid image that I'm okay, I'm fine. You know, I'm not going to get drunk. I'm not going to do drugs. I never grew up around that stuff. But gambling was the thing that I was most familiar and comfortable with. So that was the thing that I started immersing myself in. And that would really be my undoing. From the day that September 11th, so September 12th, the day after, until February 11th of 2010, for 8.5 years almost, I gambled every single day. Whether it was sports, whether it was online casino, it didn't matter if it was legal, didn't matter if it was illegal, I gambled every day. I left New York City in 2003, and I joined Prudential as a financial planner in 2000 at that time. The problem is, I was a person with a gambling problem, and I use my words carefully. I was always a person first, a person with a gambling problem who was also in charge of other people's money. And that's almost like putting the person with an alcohol problem in charge at the liquor store. You don't want to do that. There's certain things in life we're not meant to do. And in the midst of a debilitating gambling addiction, being a financial planner was probably the worst combination. In June of 2008, I met a client who referred me to a friend of his. She had just inherited $10,000, and my gambling had been progressively getting worse. But on this day was the day that I stole my first check. I met her at her house. We did the paperwork, and she simply asked me, "Who do I make the check payable to, Dan?" And I said, "You make it payable to me." And she wrote me a check for $10,000. And in that instant, I sat in my car when I got out, left the house, drove away, sat in my car for 20 minutes before I deposited that check, because there was a part of me who had grown up. I'd grown up in the church. I was involved in the church. I knew it was wrong what I was doing, and I was struggling with life. But there was the other part of me that said, you're not really stealing the money. You're just borrowing the money. And then once you win, you can pay her back. And that's the part of the reasoning that I went with. The stinking thinking that we always talk about as people who battle addiction, those stinking thinking, those bad thoughts. I thought I was just borrowing the money. I ended up losing that $10,000 in about 3 days. So now I had effectively stolen that money completely. And I remember after that, the only way I saw out of this dilemma, out of this process, was to steal another check and to try to get it right. I've got to work harder. I've got to make gambling work. Gambling has to be a part of my life. I wanted it so bad to be a part of my life. I wanted to get it right. I just had to try harder. The problem is sometimes in life, trying harder is not always the answer when we should be trying softer. I tried harder for the next 20 months. I stole over 35 checks from 11 different clients from June of 2008 until February 11th of 2010 for 20 months. And I stole over $2.1 million from 11 different clients. Each story got bigger and bolder. Each check got bigger, and the dollar amounts got bigger. The amount bet got bigger. And I just kept chasing this feeling. I kept chasing this moving target. It got to a point where there was no way I was ever going to win enough money to repay all of the people. I knew it was coming, but I couldn't do anything about it. I remember getting called into the office on February 11th, 2010. And my managing director said, "There's some people that want to talk to you." And if you're not living life the right way and you get a phone call that people want to talk to you, you're not really rushing to that meeting because you kind of have a feeling what they want to talk to you about. And I remember saying, I can't make the meeting, Bob. And he said, if you're not here at 4 p.m., we're going to be to your house at 4:30. And I would recommend you get a babysitter for the kids because you're not going to want to have them there for this. That was hard. You know, I had 3 kids at the time. I had 2 at the time and a wife who was 7 months pregnant, actually. I had twins that were born in 2005. And that would have been hard. I went down to the office that day, and there was the FBI, 2 members of the FBI, head of compliance for Prudential was there, my managing director and my direct line supervisor was there. And I just confessed to everything I had done. For the next 5 hours, I admitted to every check I had stolen, every client I had swindled, every lie that I had told pertaining to that 20-month period. There was this simultaneous feeling of relief and also fear because I knew that I'd be going to prison for this. 18 months went by. During that time, my 3rd child was born, April 13th of 2010. She's never known me to be a gambler since that time, which I'm very thankful for. But I remember August 18th, 2011, I had to sit my twins on the couch when they were about 6 years old and tell them that Daddy had to go on a business trip. Besides September 11th, that's one of the hardest days of my life. And I didn't know how long I'd be away for. I ended up getting a 6-year prison sentence. Prudential had reimbursed all of the victims, so that's why it wasn't a 10-year sentence. It went down to 6. I ended up serving a total of 4.5 years between incarceration and supervised release program and a work farm. So 4.5 years from an addiction that is absolutely debilitating and crippling. I got out of prison and I said, I have to do something different with my life. While I was in prison, I worked on emotional skills. I worked on life skills. I worked on anger management. I took full advantage of prison. And again, it's those personality traits of competitiveness, of fear of failure. I just had to do something. And those very same personality traits that can make us stumble in life can also be the very same things that pick us up when we're down and can continue to propel us forward. It's the thing that gives us hope and gives us just a feeling of, hey, I've just got to try a little bit differently, not harder, differently. There has to be a different way of living that I'm just not quite getting. And so I did. I came out of prison, got some side jobs until I ultimately started working at 800 Gambler in New Jersey, where I went on to become the assistant director for 4.5 years, helping people with gambling problems. It's the thing that I know. It's the thing that I love to talk about. I love helping people. I love educating people. I love talking about and just noodling over concepts and ideas and really driving down to those deeper fears that we all go through in life. You know, the fear of failure, a fear of focus, right? Whatever it might be, what motivates us. And so then I joined Epic in August of 2021, and I've been there now for the last 15 months as we travel the country. I'm the head of prevention in the US for Epic. And we work with the NFL Players Association, with the NCAA. We work with states. We work with affiliates. We work with the National Council, whoever we can work with, just to try to spread hope and understanding from a lived experience perspective about the devastating impact that gambling addiction can have, both to the person with the problem, as well as to the affected others. Let's not forget about the family members and the loved ones who are going through this journey with that individual. We know gambling problems occur along a spectrum. And if you look at this spectrum, you might know of someone, have someone in your life, or have someone that you've either counseled or been aware of who's kind of experienced somewhere here, right? People who don't gamble at all their entire life. That's my grandparents. They never gambled. They wanted nothing to do with it. To all the way the other end of the spectrum, full-blown disordered gambling. And along the way, we can see that people move along a continuum of risk. And the concern is, as we see more advertising, as we see more glamorization of the world of gambling without those counter measures or those counter advertisements that show the other side, that's where we have to really be careful that people don't start taking occasional gambling into recreational, into heavy gambling, trying to solve life's problems. We have to be careful that people are not moving along a spectrum by prevention points, either primary, secondary, or tertiary aspects. Going back in time, we talked about athletes, and I just wanted to highlight their specific vulnerabilities because we are talking about the NCAA and we're talking about sport and athletes. And that's an area I feel very passionate about. Having been an athlete at a high level, going on to do triathlon for 18 years after that, I love sports. I love athletes, and athletes are a slightly different breed. Yeah, and some of it is an athlete, because of their sporting knowledge, they believe that they can use that knowledge to a significant advantage. And therefore, they don't think they're at risk of developing any gambling a problem. For them, they see it as a side job. They see it as an easy way to make money. I've spoken to student athletes at Seton Hall University where they said, I don't gamble, I just bet on sports. How is that not gambling? To them, gambling is something their uncle did. Going to the racetrack, pulling a slot machine lever, that's gambling because there's no skill involved. There's no research. It's not poker. It's not sports betting. They don't see it. There's a disconnect. The encouragement and the takeaway is to make sure we're using good language when we're talking to people about gambling, about betting. One way that we've gotten through to people is we don't ask them about their gambling. We say, how much money have you spent on lottery tickets? How much time have you spent at the casino? If you look at time or money and leave the word gambling out, you can still arrive to an answer that might kind of get you back to the question you're really driving to get to. So sometimes we have to ask the same question a few different ways in order to get a good response or have a good conversation and dialogue with people. Another vulnerability, what makes athletes more vulnerable, is injury. This is a huge issue. When you're taken out of your routine, when you're taken out of your accustomed being, you are at risk. It could be alcohol, it could be drugs. Injury is devastating to an athlete. It starts planting the seeds of doubt. They start wondering, will they ever be the same? Will they get that spot back on the team? What happens if they don't? Will I have to redefine myself if I'm injured? Who am I? All those questions come along with an injury. And for some people, they'll look to escape the injury through the world of gambling or alcohol or drugs or some other potential habit that can become addictive. Athletes also look for ways to escape. There's a lot of pressure put on athletes today. The pressure to perform, social media pressures if they don't perform. We had Villanova men's basketball head coach talking about his biggest concern is not sports betting. It's about the threats that his men's basketball players will get after they lose a game that they shouldn't lose, or after a guy doesn't score as many points as he might score. So we have to be careful. We have to realize that for some people, gambling is an escape. Gambling can also be financially driven, a way to make ends meet, a side job. We always encourage people, never gamble to make money. Do not plan on making money. That's not a good strategy. You'll hear before when I was talking about I stole the first $10,000 check. In my head, I justified it by saying, when I win, I will pay her back. The key word, the key mistake was when. It's never when in the world of gambling, it's if. And you shouldn't be gambling that amount of money or gambling what you can't afford to lose anyway, because it's a form of entertainment. And lastly, gambling provides that buzz from a match. It provides those endorphins, that dopamine, the rush that people love to feel. So when you're out of season or when you're on a bye week or when you're not playing your sport because of injury, you're looking for this excitement, this adrenaline, this action. Gambling can be the thing that fills that void. We also see it with athletes who transition out of sport. When they retire, when they graduate from school, there's a massive void. How do they fill it? We have to make sure that they're educated on healthy versus unhealthy behaviors and decision-making. Lastly, we talked to student athletes at the NCAA level and professional level about sports wagering, match fixing, and inside information. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar. There's a Netflix documentary, a couple of them out that deal with this very topic. One is called Bad Sport, and it highlights the Arizona State men's basketball team from 1989. There was a point guard who ended up getting involved with a gambling ring on campus, ended up getting paid to kind of fix the outcome of the game. They weren't losing the game, but the game was close. And he was just instructed, make sure the game stays close within the point spread. And sure enough, he was getting money And long story short, he ended up going to prison for a year and losing out on his NBA dreams because he was involved in an illegal gambling operation. So we talk about the inside information, the match fixing. Tim Donaghy is an NBA referee who was known for influencing and impacting NBA games and then also betting on how he thought the outcome would be because of inside information that he had. So we talk to student athletes about this and administrators as well. So I'm going to stop sharing here now, and I wanted to leave a few minutes for any questions or answers that there might be. I hope you have found this helpful, a helpful overview to understand why we do the work we do, how we go about doing it, and hopefully there were some nuggets that were picked up along the way that you can apply either professionally or personally so that you too can keep an eye and an ear out for someone who may be experiencing gambling-related harms and point them in the right direction in the state of Minnesota to Susan and all the great folks that support gambling services out there. I want to thank you very much for allowing me into your room today from my room in New Jersey.
Dan, thank you so much. That combination of lived experience and research is amazing. We've got a couple of minutes left. If anybody in the room has any questions, just go ahead and raise your hand. We'll have a microphone come over to you. Right back here.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for this. This is fantastic. You've talked a lot about, most of the focus on this was athletes. You talked a lot about college athletes, professional athletes. Is there sort of a line drawn between, you mentioned you were a triathlete. Is there a line drawn between college pro versus recreational, intramural, other people that are competitively driven? Do you have any beyond the people that are doing it at a very visible high level? What about others that, maybe again, recreationally, intramurally, whatever? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Yes, what we know about any addiction is that there's a lot that has to tie back to adverse childhood experiences as well. And now that can impact anyone, right? We strip out whether you're an athlete or non-athlete, and we talk about your upbringing. Did you grow up in a family that dealt with addiction? We talk about the biopsychosocial nature of just addiction in general. So I want to start by saying that addiction can impact anybody, right? Whether you're an amateur athlete, social, even if you're not an athlete at all, we understand that it can impact anyone because there's so many factors that come into play. The reason that we're starting to see a little bit more emphasis on the sports side is for that last piece about the integrity issues at a high level. I started before by saying Yasiel Puig with Major League Baseball. The news just came out yesterday that he was involved in a gambling ring. That has massive implications for pro sport all the way down the line. And so what we're starting to see is the leagues are very concerned that as gambling expands state by state without any type of federal or national oversight, funding, or policy, that it could impact their sport directly. So what they try to do is they try to align themselves with non-gambling operators and institutions who can relate best to their constituents or their athletes. So, that would almost be as if, we talk about like first responders. At Epic, we have a gentleman who's on the fire department. We have someone else that we're talking to who is a high-ranking police detective. We would want them to be talking with their peers. A lot of it does come down to peer support because gambling can impact any walk of life, any demographic, male, female, Caucasian, African American, it doesn't matter. I think we're just seeing a heavy influence on a heavy focus on sports because sports in America has so much big money tied to it, I guess. And there's been so much growth state by state that the athletes really are in the crosshairs. And also you do have people who don't play sports that are betting on those athletes. So you can make the argument that, non-athletes are also impacted. So the long-winded answer is to say everyone's at risk. We just try to highlight certain sectors, whether it's financial services, pro sport, amateur sport, first responders, where we tend to see a little bit more in the way of risk factor that could lead to someone developing harm. Hopefully that helps answer the question. And if not, please do follow up.
Thanks, Dan. And the conversation that you had about peer connection is actually a great transition to a question that we had from one of our Zoom participants, asking about the use of peer recovery specialists, and any comments that you have about that, and then perhaps an opportunity for Susan Sheridan Tucker to check in, because there was also the question asking specifically about any work that's being done to certify peer recovery specialists in Minnesota.
Well, yeah, I'll defer to Susan on that one. I think peer recovery specialists are fantastic. New Jersey Council started employing some peer recovery specialists. I know Connecticut has had a program. When we can do peer-to-peer, it seems as if that model works really well. When we can relate to another person who's kind of been in our shoes, who's kind of been there, done that, and you can gain strength from that individual, because we'll see it from a slightly different perspective. We see it with vet to vet. We see it with the cop to cop programs. We see it with the Opioid Overdose Protection Act in New Jersey, where you can deploy people who struggle with overdose to opiates, and they'll come right by your side if you're struggling yourself. So I think there's a lot of value in that. Would love to see more. I think there's a tremendous need for that. So hopefully more states catch on and develop those types of programs. I'm interested to hear what Minnesota is doing well, if to see what Susan has.
Hi, Dan.
Hey, Susan.
So in terms of what's happening with peer recovery specialists in the state of Minnesota, is that it's a topic of conversation. So we are not at a point where we're utilizing peer recovery specialists. It's something that is very much on our very long laundry list of things that we'd like to see reformed in the overall delivery of services here in Minnesota.
Yeah.
So I think we're out of time at this point. So unless we had one more, was there one more question, Jeff? No.
No, there were no others on Zoom.
No. So I really appreciate you joining us this morning, and we'll have the privilege of seeing you again this afternoon. So with that, I want to say thank you.
Thank you all. Enjoy your lunch. I will enjoy my lunch here, and I'll be back in a few hours this afternoon to talk all things financial and gambling behaviors. I can't wait.
Thanks.
Thanks, Susan. Thank you all.